Hi, I'm going to talk to you today about the current economic crisis. And to understand it, we should first understand a little bit about the different schools of economic thought. There's the spectrum from free market capitalism to more statist or socialist type systems with multiple schools of thought in between. The traditional or the neoclassical or classicals, they're the supply and demanders that thinks goods find a value based on fair market, what the buyer was willing to pay and what the seller is willing to sell for. They also have this thing called the treasury view, that the economy is this fixed pie that grows and shrinks, but that the more government spending you have, the more it displaces private business, which is more efficient in those areas. So government crowds out private investment. Individualists always love this theory because it says that they should be the ones in power, and politicians don't like it because it says that often the best thing they can do is just butt out and let the economy go. Now, from the other end of the spectrum, Keynesians came along in the 30s with Keynes. And he agreed with all that, but he argued against the treasury view. And what he said is, in recessions, the economy overreacts. Private businesses tend to overcut. And so if government steps in with temporary spending, it can temporarily buoy that up and keep the economy smooth. It can smooth out the rough edges. The problem is, as Friedman put it, nothing is as permanent as a temporary program. Once a program exists, there's a special interest. There's special interests that are trying to perpetuate it. It wants to perpetuate and grow itself. People don't want to give up their jobs. So that's why it's never worked in the real world. And this theory's been disputed. It's never worked. If it had worked, if you think about it, Cuba, Soviet Union, or Europe would have outgrown the US because they spend more of their GDP on the economy than we do. Also in the 1970s, we had something called stagflation, which actually broke their models completely. But politicians have always been Keynesians because it says that they're justified in redistributive tax systems, that they should be the center of the economic universe. Now, the Chicago school are the monetarists. They're the ones that say that money makes the world go round. The easiest way to manipulate the economy is to change its money supply. This contradicts Keynesians, but basically there's three ways that the government can get money. It can tax, it can borrow, or it can print. And taxing and borrowing have immediate negative ramifications. As soon as you tax people and businesses' burdens go up, so they cut back. And if you borrow, they know it's coming, so they do it anyways. Fed chairmen have always been these monetarists because it basically says that they should be in charge of the economy. Now, the last school is the Austrians or the psychologicals. I tend to be more of them. It agrees with the others. It doesn't say that that's all wrong. It just says that it's too complex for that alone because you're not taking into account the human element. People are smart enough to know what you're doing and react accordingly. So if you do something like print lots of money, investors know that you're diluting the dollar. So they should put their money in a foreign currency or foreign gold. The history of recession in the US is basically a history of various failures of government in either regulation or in policies. In 1807, we had the Embargo Act. It was protectionism or isolationism. And when you think of what isolationism is, from a business's point of view, what you're saying is that you're going to shrink the size of my market that I can sell to because other countries are going to retaliate in kind. And you're going to increase my cost of goods because I'm not able to buy from the cheapest supplier, I have to buy from a local supplier. Ergo, my prices go up and the economy has to suffer. The Panic of 1837 was a real estate bubble. The Panic of 1873, that was basically mucking with the money supply. The interesting thing in that one is Europe went isolationist, but the US didn't. And the result was the Depression lasted 6 years for us, but 23 years for them. And then the Great Depression was like a trifecta. We went protectionist, we tightened our money supply, and government spending went through the roof. This recession isn't too different. What happened is we had a real estate bubble that was caused and or magnified by the CRA and Fannie and Freddie. Now, the Community Reinvestment Act said that banks have to give a certain percentage of loans of subprime loans in high-risk areas. Fannie and Freddie was a government-sponsored entity that would buy up those loans and then sell them back. Its purpose was to spread those even further. So banks did what CRA and Fannie and Freddie encouraged. They would make these subprime loans, sell them to Fannie and Freddie. Fannie and Freddie created these mortgage-backed securities. What it is a bank doesn't want to own only loans in their area. That's not very diversified. So Fannie and Freddie would buy up these loans, mix in a little bit of the subprime with traditional loans, but from all over the nation, and then sell them back to the banks. So now you're much more diversified than you were when you started. This was considered lowering the risk to banks, so banks did a lot of it. Now, what ends up happening is when the economy is going up, everything's great. When the economy comes down, the problem is these subprime loans are the ones that default the most. So people start defaulting, and now these mortgage-backed securities, nobody knows what they're actually worth. So they start dropping in value. Since banks have to keep a certain asset ratio, they have to sell some of these mortgage-backed securities on the open market to keep their cash supply up. The problem is, since nobody knows how much risk is in them, nobody wants to buy them. So their values start plummeting. Now on top of that, in the 2000s, we passed something called SOX, or Sarbanes-Oxley, and it used a new accounting rule called mark-to-market. It said that you won't assess the value of an asset based on like a 3-year, 5-year rolling average or other means that we used to use. You have to mark it to the last market sale. So mortgage-backed securities are crashing in value. Banks have to sell them. Bank A is distressed. They sell it for 10 cents on the dollar. Every other bank has to mark their assets to that sale. So now their assets dropped 90% overnight, and they're stressed too. Instead of the government fixing mark-to-market, they just threw money at the problem. You've all heard that myth that Herbert Hoover didn't do much during the start of the Depression, and that's what made it worse. That's a nice myth, but nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, he built the Oakland Bay Bridge. Why do you think the Hoover Dam is named after him? He basically responded as a Democrat does, or at least a Keynesian. FDR's first campaign was blasting Hoover for spending too much. Then as soon as he got in, he created the New Deal, which was just Herbert Hoover's programs under a new name. And if you track their spending patterns from Hoover to FDR as far as a percentage of GDP, the curve is near identical. They both grew the government hugely. What that didn't do is fix unemployment in the economy. We had it for another 10 years. And if it hadn't been for World War II taking all the manpower, the labor, out of the economy, we would have continued for quite a while. Japan also tried more Keynesian models, increasing government spending. And from the late 80s to the late 90s, it's called their lost decades because it hasn't helped. I mean, think about it. If it would help, then Europe or the Soviet Union would have outgrown the US. The other thing is change is it's not good to business. It's not good to the economy. The way I describe it is think of Vegas. You're an investor or you're a poker player. You ante up, and I'll tell you the rules later. How big is your ante going to be? It's not going to be very big until you know the rules. The same thing, every time government says, I'm changing the rules, I'm going to fix things, I'm here to help. Money comes off the table. Everybody cuts the size of their ante. I'm going to wait until I know the rules before I play. Bad rules are better than no rules, or better than changing rules. So, in conclusion, here's what we know about the economy. Isolationism is bad. Spending has never worked before. Money only helps in the short term, but it causes all these long-term risks. And government, unfortunately, has traditionally made things worse. Anyways, thank you for your time.